Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Iowa College AmeriCorps Program. This is our 2018 Host Site Application Technical Assistance Call. Just going to run through everything in here. If you have questions, feel free to ask throughout. Otherwise, there will be a section at the end when we can ask questions. And of course, you can always reach me outside of this technical assistance call as well. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go through the background of the program as well as our funders, what are the deadlines, what's the selection process, obligations of host sites, including the financial section, what are the available AmeriCorps positions that come with this program, what's our program design, so how do we achieve, what do we want to achieve and how do we plan to achieve it, performance measures, what are the specific performance measures that you need to set goals for, as well as submit for reports. And then lastly, the host site application, and we'll walk through that process in detail. So this first part, just wanted to go through who's all affiliated with this program. Obviously, there's Iowa Campus Compact, and since you're all Iowa Campus Compact member institutions, you have some familiarity with us, but you may not with our other partners with this grant program. So we have the Corporation for National and Community Service. This is the federal entity. This is a federal agency that provides funding to Iowa Campus Compact for this program, and their mission is to improve lives, strengthen communities, and foster civic engagement through service and volunteering. So there is a kind of natural connection between AmeriCorps and Iowa Campus Compact and what we hope to achieve in your local communities by using these AmeriCorps positions. We also work with the Iowa Commission for Volunteer Services, also known as Volunteer Iowa. Their mission there is to improve lives, strengthen communities, and foster civic engagement through service and volunteering, so pretty similar to CNCS. We applied to ICVS, or Volunteer Iowa, for this funding opportunity, and they in turn leverage funding from CNCS for our program, as well as all the most of the other programs operating in the state of Iowa. So we work most closely with Volunteer Iowa on this opportunity, although CNCS also does support us indirectly. So policies and those sorts of things that we implement in our program, those are things that are coming to us via Volunteer Iowa as well as from CNCS. So those are the requirements and regulations that we're really required in reporting on. The ICAP program specifically is an AmeriCorps program for campuses seeking to expand or deepen their community partnerships. So this can occur in a variety of ways, but just a little bit more background. This program started in 2007. We originally were doing direct service, and then in 2012, I believe it was, we switched to capacity building, volunteer management, kind of indirect services. That's what our members are doing, not necessarily the volunteers who they recruit. In 2016, we added full-time positions and additional member benefits. And then finally, just want to tout that providing capacity building, this is a program that provides capacity building services and student volunteers to Iowa's nonprofit community to enhance their services in some way. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but just know that this is a program that engages individuals as AmeriCorps members, usually students on your campus, to provide capacity building services or indirect services. The program dates for this program are August 1, 2018 through October 31st, 2019. The August 1st one is underlined and in gold because I found out maybe about a half hour ago that our program received, is allowed to start August 1 if we receive funding in this next cycle. So we're excited to offer that opportunity to bring folks on a little bit earlier in the year. Typically, our program has started September 1st, so this is a shift in a great direction for us. That Volunteer Iowa is recognizing our need for this, as well as allowing us to have an earlier start date. So they don't usually do that, but they're doing that for us, which is fantastic. AmeriCorps positions, they're awarded to your campus, so we don't work directly with your nonprofit partners, although we do have a relationship with them through this program, but we don't vet your partners beyond what AmeriCorps is required. Full-time positions, they serve your campus, so if you are thinking about or plan to request a full-time position, that position serves on your campus. They don't serve with a nonprofit partner. They're there to build the capacity of your campus, whether it's to develop your service learning opportunities, to develop service opportunities for your students, whatever else it might be. If you want them to do some sort of evaluation, if you want them to help out with your civic action planning, they can certainly do things like that. But they're not, the purpose isn't to award you this full-time position and then to place this position at one of your nonprofit partners. Part-time positions have the option of, they can either serve on campus, off campus, or both. So they can help out with some of those things I mentioned before, coordinating service learning courses, evaluating them, etc. They can also serve off campus at a nonprofit to build their capacity, which helps you to improve your partnerships with nonprofits by being able to provide them with students and AmeriCorps members who can provide indirect services, or they can do a mixture of both. I think the important thing to know is that all positions provide indirect, non-administrative services. So this isn't a program to enroll individuals into direct services. This is all about indirect or capacity building. The deadlines to apply, there are two. There's the priority deadline, that's Friday, December 1st, 2017, and then there's the final deadline, which is Friday, May 11, 2018. We encourage sites who are interested in applying for full-time sites to apply by that Friday, December 1st deadline. This helps with our planning. We're working through our process to submit this grant application, and we put out this host site application this early so that way we can ensure that your interests are represented on that application. Although we aren't able to provide a final notice of award until usually late May or in June when we receive our actual notice of awards. That way we know what we can provide you with. With that said, the priority deadlines, folks who do meet that will receive priority when we select positions that go to sites, especially in the area of full-time positions. So since we added full-time positions, that has always been our priority, is to ensure that we fill those. The selection process, this comes straight from the application, so I'm just going to go over this in a little bit of this, but you can certainly read this in detail either here or on the application instructions. But for most of our sites who are requesting continued support into the next year, how we're going to evaluate your selection into the program is your ability to submit reports and to meet your performance measure goals, your enrollment and retention rates, your compliance with submitting enrollment and exit paperwork by the established deadlines, site visit or other monitoring findings. So if that's applicable at all, if there's compliance concerns there, usually there's not, but if there is, then we will consider that. Timely payment of cost share. So that only applies to our full-time member positions only, and then meeting match requirements. So if you are a site this year and you need to submit match requirements for the financial side of things, being able to meet those match requirements is something that we do consider, because that is a big component of the program. Basically, if we're unable to meet, if Iowa Campus Compact cannot meet its match obligations as a result of you being unable to meet your match obligations, then we can't do things like enroll new members. We can't do things like request more federal funding to pay for anything in the program. So that's why that one is so critical. Some of the obligations, there obviously are many more obligations that are listed in the host site application, as well as on the host site agreement that we issue to you. You certainly can see the host site agreement if you're not familiar with it. I can send you last year's. We don't have next year's available yet, but this is those things are certainly available to you. But some of the basic requirements are to obviously be able to direct the project. So you have to be able to provide some sort of direction to what the AmeriCorps members are doing. Certainly recruit and supervise the AmeriCorps members, or assign supervision. You need to develop a position description that describes the member duties, and there are specific guidelines that are associated with that. You can find those available on the website, and we will go over where those are briefly towards the end of this presentation. And then lastly, provide necessary administrative support to complete the goals of the project, and that might be related to collecting and reporting performance measure information, collecting and reporting financial information, or any other sort of administrative support that needs to happen in order to have the project be successful. Some other obligations of the host site are related to the financial match, which is where you're expected to provide a source of matching funds for each member that you enroll. There is a $6,000 match for each full-time position. This can be cash or in-kind. For most of you, that's in-kind because you don't want to pay an additional $6,000 for your position, which is great. In-kind match can be things like personnel time. It can be office space that you're using for your AmeriCorps member. It can be space that you're using to host Iowa Campus Compact so we can complete orientations, any sort of other things. And there's a list of ideas in the host site application. You can also talk to me if you have questions about that, and I'm happy to kind of brainstorm what are some ways that we can help you achieve that. For each part-time member, the cost share is but the match rate is $175 per position, whether cash or in kind. Again, I would imagine everyone's going to use in kind because you don't want to pay that additional $175 in cash. But that's for each part-time member enrolled. And again, those things can be personnel time, they can be space, they can be if you're using funds to pay for professional development or training opportunities for the AmeriCorps members, those sorts of things would be allowable ways to match the funds that we're leveraging for this grant opportunity. The cost share, and this only applies to full-time positions, is $4,000 cash, and that is for each full-time member that is enrolled. The cash is distributed to Iowa Campus Compact, so we issue an invoice each quarter, and the funding for that goes to pay for your full-time AmeriCorps members' living allowance. So this is just a brief list of allowable sources of match. I briefly described this earlier, but things like staff times, you have to complete a background check with us. If you have any sort of travel related to your service, certainly that would apply, or professional development that would apply too. Supply purchases that are related to the program, contractual or consultant services, that might be bringing in a trainer to deliver a training or professional development opportunity to your AmeriCorps members, or other program costs. I think most popular one that we've seen in here are housing. So if you have a full-time member and you want to provide them with some sort of housing benefit, that would fit into that under other program costs. There are obligations for service sites. Now, there are host sites and there are service sites. The host site is obviously your campus. The service site could be your campus. It could also be one of your nonprofit partners. Whether it's the host site, your campus, or a nonprofit partner, everyone has to meet these requirements, these basic requirements. Obviously, they have to be able to direct the project, supervise the AmeriCorps members, develop a position description. So if you're working with a nonprofit, they do need to be involved in developing that position description, so that way they're aware of what this AmeriCorps member can and cannot do at their site, and what that AmeriCorps member can count towards their term of service. Provide necessary administrative support to complete the goals of the project. Anything that needs to happen there locally at the nonprofit site or on your campus, again, that's administrative. They need to be able to provide that. The AmeriCorps member cannot do that. What are some of the eligible organizations? So a little bit more detail into this. Service sites must be any of the following types of public organizations. They can be the host site, they can be your campus, they can be a state or local government organization, they can be an Indian tribe, a recognized Indian tribe, or they can be a nonprofit private organizations. However, organizations that focus solely on advocacy and lobbying are not eligible, but members, and also members cannot perform or recruit volunteers to perform prohibited activities for service sites. There's a lot of information in the application instructions on what are specific prohibited activities. I am going to go over that a little bit later in this presentation, but just be aware that that is something that AmeriCorps reviews quite regularly and very critically. So what are the available positions that you can request as part of this host site application process? There are 4 types. There are the semester summer part-time, there's the academic year part-time, program year part-time, and then lastly, program year full-time. The first 3 are made for usually your undergraduate students, so that way they can serve 300 hours over the course of a semester or the summer, over the academic year, which is about 8 to 9 months, over the program year, which is 10 to 12 months. And then lastly, there are the full-time positions, which is 1,700 hours, which is for the duration of 11 months, no more, no less, although they can exit early in limited cases, and we can talk about that later. individually if you have questions about that. And their intensity for those full-time positions is somewhere around 35 to 40 hours a week. Those hours don't include things like vacation time or sick time. There's a whole list of benefits that come for part-time as well as for full-time members. I'm just going to go through these really quickly, but for part-time members, they do receive professional development budget as well as a scholarship to attend the Iowa Civic Action Academy, and then the Education Award. Full-time member benefits are all the part-time member benefits. They also receive a living stipend that's paid out bi-monthly from Iowa Western Community College, totaling $15,000 over their 11 calendar months. They also receive the option to enroll into full health insurance coverage through Iowa Western Community College. And then their professional development budget is $1,000 instead of the $75,000. There are additional host site benefits that we are planning to offer with this opportunity in 2018. Iowa Civic Action Academy travel support. Last year, this was something that we awarded to everyone. This next year, it's something that you can request just because we want to make sure that we're only using the amount of federal funds that we need. So that's something that members can request. There's also a National Day of Service funding, which is available, which is a host site can request up to $1,000 in order to reimburse project funds for National Day of Service. So that can be National Day of Service or just a big student volunteer day, whatever gets your campus out to serve the community in some way. We are requiring that host sites are responsible for matching cash or in kind at least 30% of the awarded funds. So if you request $1,000, then you have to match additional $300 of that, if not more. So, and then lastly, there's evaluation project support. So host sites can request project funds in order to conduct an evaluation of their own ICAP members or service sites. Host sites, you are responsible for matching, again, cash or in kind of at least 30% of awarded funds. So that'll be available to you. There will be a lot more details about these upon you're receiving the award, but just know that these are opportunities that we're writing into the grant. So to talk about our program design, what it is that you can actually do with these members in a little bit more detail, I want to talk about what are the 4 interventions that we have for the Iowa College AmeriCorps program. There's community engagement. A lot of that is around communications, organizational development, so really building up the structure of the nonprofit or your campus, program development, working on developing new or enhancing existing programs, and lastly, volunteer management. And I wrote direct service next to this because if you have nonprofit partners or if you are interested in engaging students in direct service, that is your best option with this program, where you use an AmeriCorps position to serve as a volunteer manager, recruiter, to recruit students to provide direct services to the community in some way. So the nonprofit member or the AmeriCorps member isn't actually doing the direct service, but they are recruiting other students to provide those direct services. Kind of a logistical policy sort of things here. A full-time member can focus on 1 or more of these interventions. A part-time member can focus on 1 per service site. We do that intentionally because they only provide 300 hours of service total across their term of service, and we want to ensure that their efforts are focused in one of these areas. Certainly if they are doing mostly volunteer management stuff, they're recruiting and managing volunteers, but then some of what they're doing bleeds into community engagement, that's fine. But their focus is on volunteer management. So, they're recruiting volunteers, but then they're also posting things on social media to recruit volunteers, which would fall under community engagement. Technically, they're focused on volunteer management. And that's really what we want to see, is that they're focused in one of these areas. Some of the long-term program outcomes, so what you or your nonprofit partners can expect from this program, or what we hope that you can achieve with this program. So if you are delivering interventions or receiving interventions in the area of community engagement, organizational development, or program development, we hope that you or your nonprofit partners can expect better beneficiary outcomes, or that more beneficiaries are going to be served. So you're able to work with more, or have those individuals or families achieve better outcomes. In the area of volunteer management, we hope that you or your nonprofit partners can achieve a more sustainable pipeline of volunteers to the community. So they're receiving the number of volunteers, student volunteers, most likely, that they need in order to be successful. Before we dive into what are some of the more specific activities of this program that ICAP can provide to you or your community, I want to talk about prohibited activities. I'm just going to touch base on what are the big ones that AmeriCorps really views heavily. So it's important to know that these are activities that ICAP members themselves and the volunteers that they recruit or manage cannot do. So if you are interested in doing any of these things, or you have a nonprofit partner that is interested in doing any of these things, that's great. They're all definitely valuable things, services to provide to your community. You just cannot have ICAP members associated with them. So you can assign them to a non-ICAP member student. You can assign them to a staff member or something else. You know, in any case, though, the AmeriCorps position cannot be involved in these sorts of activities. So they cannot displace or duplicate existing staff or volunteer efforts. What that means is that, I guess you specifically, if you're the applicant, you can't expect to lose your job and have it be replaced by a full-time member. Same thing for a nonprofit site. They can't expect that they're going to, if they were hiring a position and then they decide that, well, we don't want to hire that position, now we're going to have an ICAP member. That wouldn't be allowable. They cannot provide abortion services. They cannot conduct voter registration drives, partisan or nonpartisan. And especially going into the midterm election, that's something very important to know, that your AmeriCorps members cannot conduct voter registration drives or recruit individuals to do that either. They cannot grant applications for federal funds, including AmeriCorps, and they cannot proselytize. Usually with that one, we see if there's AmeriCorps members who want to serve at like a church or something like that, just making sure that the AmeriCorps member knows that although they can do great things for the community through the church, they cannot like lead a Bible study class as part of their AmeriCorps experience. There's a full list in the host site application that you can view. If you do have questions about this, please feel free to ask before you apply, so that way we can ensure that you're meeting all those requirements. But what are the specific interventions that we have, and more importantly, what are some examples of things that happen? So under the area of community engagement, some outcomes that you or your nonprofit partners can expect to experience would be increased awareness of your organization or increase the diversity of partnership arrangements. And there's some example activities here. There's a whole list that's in the actual application instructions, and you can go through those and read through those just to get an idea of what are some examples that fall within that. This says community engagement, but this should say organizational development. But the ones for organizational development are regularly assess your strengths and needs, your campus's strengths and needs. So if you're looking at doing the civic action planning, this would be a great intervention for you. Assess external opportunities and risks. So look at things like policy and things like that, and have members do research on policy. That might be a great idea. Something that your nonprofit partners might be interested. In the area of program development, some of the things that you or your community can expect to experience would be the increased number of clients served, track types and amounts of program services provided, obtain client feedback, and then track client outcome data. And then lastly, in the area of volunteer management, some of the outcomes that you could experience here would be increased visibility in the community and at your local college or university campus. So that would be obviously for your nonprofit partners. Improve client services. Having more volunteers involved could help improve client services or better prepared volunteers. You could also increase volunteer retention, and then lastly, increase the program's capacity to perform, so they're able to serve more clients or more beneficiaries or more families. So with that said, with all the interventions through there, I want to talk about the performance measures that we're asking you to report on for this program, and to give us estimates in the actual application. One thing that I will say about the performance measures is that in the application, as you tell the application, like if you wanted to have 1 full-time member and 3 part-time members, it will calculate estimates for you based upon what we would expect those members to perform. Obviously, you can change those things based upon your specific example, your specific situation, but just know that it's going to do that just to give you an idea or a ballpark of where we think that you should be. In the area of capacity building, the outputs and outcomes. So the outputs are kind of the things that we're tallying up. This would be the number of organizations receiving capacity building services. This is specific to just where the ICAP members are serving. So if you have an ICAP member that's serving on your campus, but they're connecting volunteers to 20 nonprofits in your community, the number of organizations receiving capacity building services would be your campus. Outcome, the number of organizations reporting that capacity building helped make them more effective. This would be, again, where the ICAP member is serving. And this is the kind of the change that we would expect to see to happen at that nonprofit. In the area of volunteer management, we have for the output, again, the thing that we're counting, just the number of community volunteers recruited by ICAP members. And then lastly, the number of organizations implementing effective volunteer management practices. And this would fall similar to the capacity building outputs and outcomes. And those number of organizations implementing effective volunteer management practices would be where the ICAP member is placed. So again, if you have an ICAP member who's recruiting volunteers for 10 nonprofits in your community, the organization that's implementing the effective volunteer management practices would be your campus where the ICAP member is placed. That doesn't necessarily mean that the 10 nonprofits aren't benefiting from these volunteer management practices, or they're not, they may also be receiving capacity building support. That may be true, but for the purposes of the grant, this is how we're measuring it, just to keep it simple and hopefully save you time and effort, and really to be able to have us talk about these things a lot more clearly to our funders. So before we close out and to the question section of the training, I just wanted to go through the application instructions as well as the application itself. So I'm going to open this thing up. Let me. All right, so here is the host site application instructions that you can get from the website. So one thing I'll note in here is that this will change here soon. Right now it has the program year begins on September 1. That will change to August 1 since we just received that notification. So this will receive some updates after that. But and here you'll see just how, I'll talk about how this document is organized. Towards the top there's those timelines, the selection process, host site obligations. So if you want to know what you're getting yourself into, this is a good opportunity to see that. Service side obligations, if you're working with nonprofit partners, you want to communicate these things to them if they're interested in having and receiving ICAP member support. And then what are the available AmeriCorps positions? This is no different than what we talked about before, though there are recruitment deadlines. These will change because our start date moved up into August, and we hope to have full-time members who can start in the month of August before students get on your campus. That was something that's been asked for a lot, so we just want to make sure that we can provide that to you. There's a whole list of AmeriCorps benefits that are provided to your members, as well as the additional member benefits. This is just kind of notifying you that you can provide additional member benefits. And you can also expect to receive additional benefits to your host site. These are the things that I talked about for additional host site benefits. Member eligibility, what are our requirements for ICAP members to serve in the program? You can see that list there. There's the capacity building intervention section with all the outcomes that I talked about, as well as the example activities lists in detail, and you can go through those, and hopefully that'll inspire you and think about ways that you can use an AmeriCorps member on your campus. And then the member activities, this is just kind of telling you that, talking about how this all connects with capacity building and what does capacity building actually mean for CNCS as well as for this program. Again, there's a link in here to the ICAP position description guidance, which is critical, and that's especially if you're requesting a full-time member, that's something that you'll need to look over during the application process, so that way you can complete that application and submit that position description at this time. There's a whole list of prohibited activities. If you have questions about that, please do not hesitate to ask either myself or Ryan, and we're happy to help you out with that. Match requirements, there's the unallowable sources of match, whole list in there. Allowable sources of matching funds, these are broken out by different categories, so you can go through that. If you have questions about sources of match, that is something that we are expecting you to report in your host site application. please feel free to contact me and I can help you think about that. The performance measures, this just provides more detail and definitions around each of the performance measures that we're asking you to report on, as well as ways that you're going to be expected to collect that information. So like as an example, let's see, if I go down to a number of organizations implementing volunteer management practices, we have under data collection methods, we have a specific pre and post survey that you're expected to use and to report back to us on. So we also have the suggested minimum calculations. The application does tally those up for you. Again, those are suggestions and you can certainly edit those based upon your needs, but just know that those are available in here so that we can see how we came up with those numbers. And then lastly, here's the application kind of outline on here. That's it, available right there. I'm going to go over to the actual application and just run through it real quick because I want to point out a couple things here. So at the beginning of it, you can just see we have all the purpose, eligibility, timeline, selection, a lot of the critical things that we have listed in the application instructions. There's a save and resume later button. So if you wanted to fill this out, you can certainly, click that button anytime throughout while filling out your application. Then you have 30 days to fill it out and submit it. Click next and then it takes you to the next section. So we need to know the organization information. So this would be your campus name. Your applicant information, we need to know your name. This cannot be an AmeriCorps member. The application type, whether you are a new site, if you're a returning site, or if you're returning with proposed expansion. If you are a site that is returning and you want to request fewer positions, you can certainly do that. You would just be a returning site. I'm going to click on new for right now because that prompts some specific questions in a narrative area, and I'll just point those out real quick. But in here, you can request the number of positions. Again, we have them broken out by type, semester, academic year, program year, and program year full-time. There's a few things I want to point out with this. So if I put in 5 program year part-time and I put in 1 program year full-time, it's going to prompt, with the full-time, it's going to prompt me to upload the position description. You can find more information about the position description on the ICAP website. There's a link right here. And I'm just going to go over to that. So if I had clicked on it, this is where that would take me to, which is the ICAP program website. There's a ton of information on here. This first little item right here, this is the template that we're expecting you to fill out. There's the position description training that you can watch. And then there's the whole list of requirements on what needs to go in there. Certainly we review your position description and try to help you in filling it out so that way it's compliant with all of our funders' needs, but just know that these are all the general guidelines that we're expecting you to meet. And then lastly, there is the position description checklist, and this is a helpful checklist that you can go through. This is what we go through when we look at your position description and provide you feedback. So if all those things are met, then hopefully we've all done our jobs and we've been able to have a great position description. The other thing I'll say is, so I put those numbers in there saying that I wanted 5 part-time and 1 full-time position, is that in this next section, benefits and matching funds, this is going to total up the total value of the positions, broken out the total value, their living allowance, their health insurance, their professional development, etc. So what are all those, the grant funds that are being leveraged for those positions, what are their total values, and then what is your total requested funds, cost share, and matching fund requirements. So you can see here, if you're fully awarded, your ICAP members will receive benefits totaling that much. You will be responsible for paying that cost share, that cash cost share, $4,000. And you will also be responsible for matching grant funds totaling $6,875. And then in this next box, we want to know what is your proposed source of match. So we want some detail here, how you're going to get to that $6,875. Are you going to use personnel time? Are you going to use office space? Are you going to use something else? So if you have questions, please let me know. We want to know in advance how you could meet that requirement. This is just a notice that there are available. We plan to have other available program benefits and what they are. And if you're a new site, we want to know how this program is going to help build your capacity and member support. So these are just a couple of narrative questions in here for you to consider. I'm going to hop over to the application instructions because let me scroll down. So here we have just some more instructions on and maybe a little bit more information on what we're looking for. And really we just want to know, how do you feel like this you would benefit from this program, and how will it improve your program's ability to better connect with the community. So so that's for new sites. I'm going to scroll back up here, and if you're a returning site, you don't have to fill out that section. If you're returning with proposed expansion, then you do have to fill out some questions as well. So if you requested and you received 5 part-time members this year, the next year you want to add on a full-time member, so you have 5 part-time and then 1 full-time, we would want to know why you're expanding your program. So how's it going to improve your institution's capacity in the area of community engagement? And then how will the additional positions be supervised? Those are the things that we're interested in knowing. So how are you going to kind of tackle these new positions to your campus? Under performance measurement goals, I mentioned earlier that this will automatically calculate these numbers for you based upon our suggested numbers. So you can use those goals or you can adjust them as you need it. So the number of volunteers recruited by ICAP members, the suggestion is 66. But if you felt like you know that you're going to have a big day of service event that your full-time member is going to do a lot of recruitment for on campus, and that's going to be a big chunk of your student body, you might want to put this at 500, whatever that might be. So look at that and think about that as you're filling out the performance measures section of this. Finally, the last part here, these are just all the other things that we anticipate that you're going to have to report on as well. So all the volunteer measures, all the beneficiary measures, and all the member measures. Those are all the things that we're required to report on, and subsequently you are required to report on as well. So with that, and then that's the application. So I'm going to go back to the slides here and just go back to questions. So if you do have any questions, you can certainly talk now. Otherwise, you can also reach me here. I'm going to stop the recording part of this this training so that way we can dive into any of those questions.